The mess hall buzzed with the familiar chaos of late lunch, metal trays clattering, boots scraping tile, overlapping voices echoing off the high ceiling. The smell of overcooked pasta and strong coffee hung in the air. She stepped inside without drawing attention, which was exactly how she preferred it. Average height, hair pulled tight, uniform worn the same as everyone else's, nothing about her screamed special. She moved with quiet economy, shoulders relaxed, eyes forward, absorbing everything without looking like she was looking. Where people sat, who was standing, which exits were clear, old habits never left. She took a tray and joined the line, nodding politely when someone bumped her elbow. To most eyes, she was just another junior service member, maybe new to the base, maybe someone who kept her head down to avoid trouble. That assumption was made very quickly by 4 recruits lounging near the center tables. They were loud, flushed with confidence, fresh out of training, uniforms still stiff with newness. One of them noticed her first, nudging the others and smirking. They watched the way she walked, steady, unhurried, not reacting to the noise around her. As she passed, one of them deliberately stepped into her path. "Careful there," he said, not moving. His tone was playful but edged with something else. She stopped, meeting his eyes for a brief second. There was no fear in her expression, no irritation either, just calm. She shifted slightly, intending to step around him, but another recruit blocked that side, grinning. Laughter bubbled up from their table. A few nearby soldiers glanced over, then looked away. Mess halls were full of moments like this, and most people preferred not to get involved. She waited, not frozen, waiting. Her tray was balanced easily in one hand, untouched food steaming faintly. Someone made a comment about her size. Another joked that she must be lost. The circle tightened just a little, enough to be noticed if you knew what to look for. She felt the change immediately. The way their feet repositioned, the way one of them leaned forward, testing boundaries. Her pulse stayed steady. 45 seconds can feel very long when you're deciding whether a situation will stay stupid or turn dangerous. "Move along," one recruit said, tapping the edge of her tray with his finger. The sound echoed louder than it should have. A couple of heads turned. She lowered her tray slowly onto the nearest table, placing it with care, as if she didn't want the cup to spill. That small action, controlled, deliberate, was the first thing that didn't quite fit the image they'd created of her. She straightened, hands relaxed at her sides, posture loose but balanced. Another recruit reached out, fingers brushing her shoulder in what he probably thought was harmless intimidation. The contact was light, careless. Around them, the mess hall noise dipped and swelled again, unaware of how close the air was to snapping. She finally spoke, her voice quiet, even, almost bored. "Step back." They laughed. One of them shoved the table behind her, blocking her retreat, convinced now that she was bluffing. But while they were focused on her face, her attention had already mapped the room, distance to the wall, angle of approach, who might step in late. She exhaled slowly through her nose. The waiting was over. Everything that followed would happen fast. Too fast for shouting, too fast for second thoughts. But in that moment, right before movement, she was still just standing there, calm in the middle of noise, surrounded by 4 recruits who believed they had control. They didn't notice how the mess hall seemed to hold its breath, or how her eyes sharpened, not with anger, but with certainty. The first movement was so quick it didn't register as violence at all, just a sudden shift in space, like the air itself had snapped sideways. The recruit closest to her felt his wrist caught before he felt pain. She turned into him, not away, using his reach as leverage, twisting with a precision that came from years of muscle memory. He was already off balance before his mind caught up, his tray skidding across the floor as his body followed, hitting the tiles with a breathless thud that cut through the noise of the mess hall. For half a second, the other 3 froze, caught between laughter and confusion. That hesitation was all she needed. She stepped through the gap, her elbow snapping up into the chest of the second recruit, not with wild force but with exact placement. The sound he made was more surprise than agony as the air left his lungs. He staggered back into a chair, which collapsed under his weight, metal legs screeching as he went down in a tangle of limbs. Someone shouted. Chairs scraped. The mess hall noise shattered into sharp fragments of sound. The third recruit lunged, angry now, convinced brute force would fix what embarrassment couldn't. She pivoted, letting his momentum carry him forward, her foot hooking behind his ankle as her shoulder drove into his center of gravity. He slammed into the wall hard enough to rattle the framed notices, sliding down until he was seated on the floor, blinking, the fight drained from him before it had properly begun. The fourth one hesitated longer than the rest. He had just enough awareness to realize something was wrong, deeply wrong. He raised his hands, half in defense, half in disbelief. She closed the distance in 2 steps. Her grip was firm but controlled as she twisted his arm behind his back, guiding him down until his knees hit the floor. His face flushed red, not just from pressure but from the dawning realization that this wasn't a joke anymore. "Don't move," she said quietly, close enough that only he could hear. Her voice was steady, unraised, carrying no thrill of dominance. It was the voice of someone used to being obeyed in worse places than a mess hall. He went still immediately. Around them, the room had gone almost completely silent. Trays lay abandoned on tables. A spoon rolled off the edge of a counter and clinked against the floor, the sound echoing far too loudly. Dozens of soldiers stared, some halfway risen from their seats, others frozen with cups paused midair. No one stepped in. No one laughed now. What they were seeing didn't fit the usual shape of a mess hall scuffle. There was no chaos in her movements, no wasted energy. Everything had been clean, efficient, finished before most people had even stood up. She released the pressure on the recruit's arm just enough to let him breathe, keeping him pinned without cruelty. Her gaze swept the room, not in challenge but in awareness, checking for anyone else who might misunderstand the situation and make it worse. Seeing her eyes, a few people instinctively took a step back. Footsteps thundered at the entrance as the duty officer rushed in, hand already raised to shout. The words died in his throat. He took in the scene in seconds, the recruits on the floor, the stillness, the way she stood. His posture changed immediately. He straightened, heels clicking together in a sharp snap of respect that rippled through the room. "Ma'am," he said, voice tight. She nodded once and released the final recruit, who stayed on his knees, shaken. The officer looked at her sleeve, at the insignia most people hadn't noticed until now. A murmur moved through the mess hall, quiet but electric. Someone whispered it, barely audible, yet somehow everyone heard. "Navy SEAL." The words carried weight, settling over the room like a sudden gravity shift. The recruits, faces drained, of color as understanding finally landed. Not just that they'd picked the wrong person, but that they'd witnessed a level of discipline and capability far beyond anything they'd known. She picked up her tray from the table where she'd set it down, the food still untouched, and walked away as the mess hall slowly exhaled, changed by what it had just seen. The mess hall remained tense, the echoes of metal trays and sliding chairs still hanging in the air, as she moved toward an empty table at the far end. Every eye followed her, some in awe, some in disbelief, and most in a combination of both. The 4 recruits had gathered themselves, pale and shaking, sitting in stunned silence while others whispered to each other, exchanging guesses, theories, and barely contained laughter at their own embarrassment. But no one dared step closer. The energy in the room was no longer ordinary mess hall chaos. Something had shifted, something invisible but palpable. She sat down deliberately, placing her tray neatly in front of her, the food untouched, almost as if it were an afterthought. She exhaled slowly, not in relief, but in control. It was a subtle signal, a quiet assertion of dominance, the kind that required no words. Around her, soldiers were still murmuring. Someone finally spoke up, voice barely audible. She's a Navy SEAL." Heads nodded, eyes widened, phones quietly clicked open as some tried to capture the moment, though many just stared, unable to turn away. The recruits who had instigated the confrontation were still on the floor, nursing bruises and egos alike. They avoided her gaze, knowing that any interaction could provoke another display, though no one was tempted to test her again. The officer who had rushed in remained standing near the entrance, arms crossed, observing, making mental notes for the reports he'd file later. He had seen combat-trained personnel before, but witnessing it in such a close, everyday setting, amid laughter, trays, and chatter, was disarming. He realized this was more than training. This was instinct, precision, and raw experience manifested in moments. Other soldiers began to disperse slowly, returning to their meals, but the air still carried a tension that would not dissipate easily. Conversations restarted cautiously, low and hesitant, punctuated by glances toward her. She ate quietly, taking a bite, not rushed, not distracted, exuding calm confidence. She was a paradox, unassuming yet intimidating, quiet yet undeniably commanding. Every movement, every small gesture reinforced the impression that she was not just a Navy SEAL, but a master of perception, control, and timing. By now, even the recruits began to absorb the lesson, though perhaps not fully consciously. They had learned something far more valuable than hand-to-hand combat. They had seen focus, patience, and poise in the midst of a chaotic environment. She hadn't shouted, she hadn't overreacted, she had merely allowed their aggression to play out and then ended it with perfect efficiency. The weight of that realization began to settle in their minds, slowly at first, then more emphatically, leaving no room for doubt about her capability. The murmurs reached a crescendo when someone finally said aloud, the words carrying almost reverence, "She's untouchable." Others nodded, some smiling nervously, knowing that their previous assumptions had been completely wrong. She finished her meal calmly, standing with the same quiet authority she had entered with. Without a glance back, she adjusted her uniform, slung her tray, and moved toward the exit. As she walked past, the recruits remained on the floor, still pale, still stunned, now fully aware of the magnitude of what had just occurred. The mess hall had returned to a semblance of normalcy. But the memory of the incident lingered, a quiet lesson embedded in the minds of everyone who had witnessed it. The weight of respect was tangible, silent, and irrevocable. She stepped outside, the door closing softly behind her, leaving the mess hall and its occupants forever changed by a single, decisive 45-second encounter. Before you go, make sure to subscribe to my channel to catch more incredible real-life stories like this. Trust me, you don't want to miss what happens next.